centuries, it was believed that all crystals whose surfaces are comprised of smooth facets are periodic. This means that they are built from a single unit cell which repeats itself in all three dimensions. Well, this was the opinion 30 years ago. At the beginning of the 1980s, Dan Shechtman made a fantastic discovery: highly ordered faceted materials which are not periodic. Materials which were at that time considered to be pure science fiction. Here at the University of Stuttgart, we are performing experiments which allows us to explore novel yet unexplored physical properties of such quasicrystals. To understand the structure of quasicrystals, it's helpful to consider how a plane can be covered with differently shaped tiles. Let's start with squares. Here it's simple to understand that adding more and more squares side by side, you can easily fill the plane without leaving gaps. So this is a so-called fourfold rotational symmetry because rotation by 90 degrees leaves the shape unaltered. So very much the same thing happens if you use triangles. Again, we can add more and more triangles side by side, and again, no gaps occur in the system. This is a sixfold rotational symmetry because here rotation by 60 degrees leads again to the same structure. So what about fivefold rotational symmetries? Here it's obvious that the unit cell is a pentagon. And here you immediately see the problem. Starting with a single pentagon, it's easy to add, let's say, a second and a third tile, but you immediately observe that there is a gap in between. And this gap cannot be easily closed by adding more and more pentagons. So this is the problem. For fivefold rotational symmetry, obviously a single unit cell which repeats itself in all dimensions is not sufficiently to describe that structure. Therefore, in order to describe quasicrystals, obviously at least another shape of tile is required. So you need two different types of tiles to describe such a structure, in contrast to fourfold or sixfold rotational symmetries.
Today we know that these crystals are ordered in a way which we call quasi-periodic. Quasi-periodicity is a notion that mathematicians have known for about 100 years. And just for short, instead of calling them quasi-periodic crystals, we call them quasicrystals.
So the question is, what makes quasicrystals interesting? Well, first of all, there is, of course, their, compared to periodic crystals, exotic structure. In addition, however, there is a more serious background, namely the physical and chemical properties of those materials, which are very different compared to their periodic counterparts. For example, quasicrystals have a very small, about a factor of 10 reduced friction coefficient compared to periodic materials. In addition, the electrical, optical, magnetical and other mechanical properties are very different compared to their periodic counterparts.
The only way we can study atomic crystals is by performing what are called diffraction experiments. We cannot really observe what the individual atoms are doing.
Instead, in our experiments, we are using colloidal particles, which are about 10,000 times larger than a single atom.
I'm very excited about the experiments that are performed in the lab of Professor Bechinger at the University of Stuttgart because they give us the opportunity to look at them directly. We can put a video camera and look at individual atoms. These are not real atoms. These are small spheres.
And by doing so, we obtain direct information about their position. And the experiments we are going to show you in the following are performed by Jules Michael and Thomas Brolein.
It was very exciting to work on this project for the previous 4 years.
I believe that this experiment is unique because it allows us to gain information which is impossible to be obtained in atomic systems. The big advantage of our experiment is we can see our colloidal particles with an optical microscope.
The quasicrystals that are studied in the lab of Professor Bechinger at the University of Stuttgart are quasicrystals that are not made of atoms, but instead are made of very small little spheres.
We take a solution of water and very tiny particles, which you cannot see with the naked eye,
That have the size of about a micron, which is a thousandth of a millimeter, or roughly the diameter of a hair. These are very small, but of course they're much, much larger than real atoms that make up ordinary crystals. This gives the experiments the wonderful advantage that even though they're small, with the right microscope, one can actually see and observe each one of these little spheres.
And because these particles are so small and tiny, we manipulate them by using laser beams.
and the lasers here act like a tractor beam, which you might know from science fiction movies, which allow us to move particles just by light forces.
And since we are taking 5 laser beams, we can then create quasi-periodic structures.
Here we have a very strong laser beam. It's about 20,000 times stronger than a commercial laser pointer. It's reflected on that mirror, passes a telescope, gets reflected on this mirror, and then enters the interferometer. This is that part of the setup where we create our interference pattern. To do this, we have to split up the beam into 5 individual beams. This is done by using these cubes here, which are beam splitters.
We use optical tweezers, which employ the fact that our colloidal particles are always pulled into the region of highest laser intensity. Therefore, the laser beams form a potential landscape identical to that on an atomic quasicrystalline surface.
The 5 laser beams are arranged on a regular pentagon. They finally reach that lens, travel horizontally over there, and then get focused in the sample cell where we have our colloidal suspension.
Our laser beams overlap in the sample cell where we have the colloidal particles. Now, if we let just 2 laser beams overlap, we get a line pattern. If we allow 3 laser beams to overlap, we get a triangular structure. And if we let 5 laser beams overlap, we get the structure that we are seeking for, which is a quasi-periodic structure. In order to reveal the structure of our colloidal system, we have implemented in the experiment an additional laser beam. This beam is having a wavelength of 488 nanometers. That means it is blue. It is then guided through some optical elements to our sample cell, and then it is diffracting on our colloidal particles. As a result, we get a diffraction pattern which is having the symmetry of our colloidal system. So from this information, we can learn about the structure of our colloidal pattern.
In a way, this system is mimicking the atomic quasicrystal, the crystal that's made out of real atoms that are really, really, really small, and allowing us to see what every individual atom is doing in the material. The study of colloidal quasicrystals really complements the study of atomic quasicrystals and gives us new insights and a deeper understanding of the physics of these very interesting materials in ways that we could not understand before.
Our experiments may play an important role towards a better understanding of their fundamental properties. But in addition, research on quasicrystals may also lead to materials which will be used by you at home.